At long last, we've reached the end of the road in Season 7 and the champion has been crowned. But first things first, we've got awards to cover, including the All-NWBA teams and those coveted MVP awards. A lot of wacky and wild happenings over the course of the season, but who would walk away with the moment and match of the season? And of course, the big burning question to answer at the end of the season. Corway, in the midst of their crazy mid-season GM switch, Humalo having to drag themselves out of a 1-4 hole, who would emerge as the champion in Season 7? The finale of Wonder Room coming up next. Wonder Room is brought to you in part by Booze Mobile and by Kurtz's Chicken. And now for your host, King Vasser. Hello everybody and welcome to the final episode of Wonder Room in Season 7. It has been quite a long time. There have been a lot of delays, some our fault, others not, but at the end of the day, we are finally here to bring you the final episode to cover the NWBA Finals and the end of season awards for Season 7. Obviously, there's a lot to cover. Let's get to the fun stuff first because there are quite a few accolades to cover, and there was a lot of competition for those accolades in Season 7. We start with the league honors for Season 7, the best in class in 4 separate categories, starting with the Berserk Gene Award, which goes to the Pokemon which scored the most KOs in their respective league. No surprises here, said Titan, the record breaker, 101 KOs, the first triple-digit KO season in NWBA history by a avalanche. The record in NWBA history, that goes for Gen 8 and Gen 9. On the Sapphire side of things, Bass Legion Female 64 KOs wins it the award, second in the league, and also second most in Gen 9 history. We haven't seen a season this prolific outside of Titan since Season 1, so an absolutely incredible season for Bass Legion Female wins it the other Berserk Gene Award. The Secret Sword Award, which goes to the highest qualified KDA in the league for the Ruby League, goes to Oricorio Sensu. Did not play that many games, but those are the mons that typically end up winning this award. Its flat 7 KDA was first in the entire league and tied for the second best effort we have seen in the Gen 9 era. On the other side, you've got Haxorus of Humalao winning it with a 4.1 KDA. That was 5th overall in the league and 13th all-time in Gen 9. So not as high as other Secret Sword Award winners, but it was the most prolific in the Sapphire League, and that's all that matters. For the Helping Hand Award, which goes to the most assists in the league, Swampert, also of Sir Chester, ends up getting the award. Its 45 assists led the league and is the most assists we've seen in a Gen 9 season outside of Yuxi in Season 5. And over on the Sapphire side, you've got Tinkaton of Mistralton, whose 30 assists were good for 3rd best in the league and 11th in Gen 9. So still a very good season. It's hard to get 20 or more assists in a season, which is why the 2020 club has been so prestigious. 20 KOs and 20 assists is really hard to come by, but we've seen an uptick in recent seasons. The way Gen 9 has been played, we've seen a lot more mons end up making the club than in the past. This season, we've got 6 inductees. Cleavor and Landrysian of Corway, so that's the first time that a single team has put multiple Pokemon in the 2020 club. This is Cleavor's 2nd time making the club. Samurott H, who also makes the club for a 2nd time, makes it in for Heart Home in back-to-back seasons. Iron Treads of Nacrane City ends up barely making it in, as well as Overquill of New Moon. And then finally, Ogrepon Cornerstone, who was a monster offensively, also found the time to put in 20 assists for Mauville this season. We move on now to the unofficial, but still arguably just as valid, end of season accolade for the NWBA, the All-NWBA team, starting with our lovely first team, same as before. 12 Pokemon make it in, 2 per tier, including 2 EXs, and This was quite the interesting season. There was a lot of competition for both teams, but your first team is as follows. In OU, Blaziken of Sirchester, Latias of Littlroot as an EX, and Enamorous Eye of Kitakami. In UU, Haxorus of Humalao and Ogrepon Cornerstone of Mauville. In RU, Slitherwing of Veilstone and Basque Legion F, also of Mauville. Down in NU, Titan of Ambrit Town, Iron Thorns of Sirchester as an EX, and Umbreon of Mistralton. And in PU, you've got Arcanine, also of Sirchester, and Toxtricity of Coroway. When you take a look at the numbers, it's not hard to understand why these Pokemon were considered the cream of the crop in their respective tiers in Season 7. Starting with the Sirchester trio, Blaziken put up 40 KOs, 69 points, 1.3 KOs per game. Iron Thorns put up 57 points, 2.5 points per game, and 1.3 KOs per game as a Terra Captain. And Arcanine, also as a Terra Captain, put up 49 points, 1.9 points per game, and a 3.8 KDA. Sirchester was one of the most offensively overwhelming teams in the entire league, and the trio of Blaziken, Iron Thorns, and Arcanine was really able to get it done. You see high points per game, high KOs per game, and even effective KDAs. They were getting it done all throughout the season. And the fact that there are three of them on the first team lets you know just how potent that offense was for what ended up being one of the top teams in the Ruby League. Latias makes it in as an EX for Littlroot. It's 60 points, 2.5 points per game, and 1.5 KOs per game. Let you know that as a very rare OU Terra Captain, Latias was actually very effective. Littlroot didn't have that much regular season success, but Latias was a pain to deal with for many different teams, being able to terastallize into a fairy type and poison type, and as such, when Latias was allowed to play, it wreaked havoc on teams. Enamorous Eye started off the season as an MVP contender, ended up falling off in the back half of the season, but still put up enough of an effort to make it to the first team. 45 KOs, 67 points, 28.4 usage rate. This thing was a workhorse for Kitakami, and the biggest reason why they were able to make their first playoff in franchise history. Haxorus, one of the most accomplished Pokemon in the history of this league, once again making the first team. 69 points, 3.1 points per game, and 4.1 KDA. Haxorus, also a Terra Captain, didn't get to play a full season, but it played more than enough games to put in the work. High points per game, high KDA, the biggest reason why Humalai was able to make it all the way to the NWBA Finals. Ogrepon Cornerstone and Basque Legion Female were the dynamic duo for Mauville. 42 KOs, 25 assists, and 77 total points for Ogrepon Cornerstone, while Basque Legion Female put up 64 KOs, 111 points, and it had a usage rate of 35.6. These two were the biggest pieces of a Rain team that ended up giving GM Luck his best season in his very long NWBA career. Slitherwing of Veilstone was their lone representative, but put together a great season, Slitherwing second in 3. 37 KOs, 55 points, and 31.9 usage rate. Again, this thing was the workhorse for a Veilstone team that able just barely to sneak into the playoffs. Then you have the big man, the most accomplished season in NWBA history, authored by none other than Titan. 101 KOs, 181 points, both NWBA records, as well as a record 45.5% usage rate. This was a one-man show on what ended up being the best regular season team in Season 7. And of course, it would be to no surprise since the Titan easily finds its way to the first team. Then you have Toxtricity, the PU representative, one of the two, for Coroway. 31 KOs, 2.0 points per game, 1.3 KOs per game. Not as great stats as some of the other mons that make it to the first team, but you have to remember it's best in tier. And Toxtricity was very good in PU, especially considering it only really played in the back half of the season, but it was a juggernaut for Coroway during that stretch, and one would have to wonder what its numbers would look like if it played the full season for King and that roster. And then lastly, you have the biggest surprise, Umbreon and Miss Stroughton making it through an NU. Last season, we talked about how Wochen got a lot of shine, made an all-star appearance, and was second team on PU for its defensive prowess. Umbreon took that philosophy and upped the ante, finished with 55 total points, and while its other stats didn't really compare to its peers, the fact that a Pokemon that is known entirely for its defensive prowess was able to put up that many points in the season and almost authored a postseason push for Miss Stroughton means that Umbreon is still very well deserving of its spot on the All-NWBA first team. And now we take a look at the second team for the All-NWBA rosters. You've got Gliscor as an EX pick from Mount Coronet in OU, Landorus Therian of Corwin, and Cinderace of Littleroot. In UU, you've got Caesar of New Moon and Zapdos of Mauville. In RU, you've got Lucario of Ambrit Town, Cleavor of Corway, and Overquill of New Moon as an EX pick. In NU, you've got Infernape of Hearthome, Flygon of Mauville, and then in PU, you've got Palmot of Sunyshore and Mudsdale of New Moon. Now, of course, these second team stats aren't going to be anywhere near as gaudy as their first team counterparts, but still very impressive compared to the rest of the league in their own right. Gliscor, the lone representative for Mount Coronet, was an EX pick in OU. 3.7 points per game, 2.0 KS per game, and a 4.4 KDA. This one did not appear often, but when it did appear, it was very threatening, was more offensive than it was defensive, and it paid dividends for Mount Coronet. You see those per game numbers, some of the best that we've ever seen across one Mon in a single season. Corway puts 2 Pokemon on the second team, both 2020 club members. Landorus, 32 assists, 53 total points, and a 2.4 KDA, while Cleavor put up 21 assists, had 1.7 points per game, and a usage rate of 23.9. Both were very important cornerstones for a Corway team that was more about the sum of its parts than anything else, but doesn't change the fact that Landorus Therian and Cleavor both had very good seasons, and as a result, find themselves on the second team. Littleroot's second All-NWBA member comes in the form of Cinderace, who put up 36 KOs, 57 total points, and 28 usage rate. It was part of a dynamic duo with Latias. Obviously, you look at the final record for Littleroot, and they weren't as dynamic as you would have hoped as far as wins and losses are concerned, but as far as numbers were concerned, those two were definitely dynamic and definitely scary. New Moon, the top seed in the Sapphire League, ended up putting 3 Pokemon on the All-NWBA second team. Caesar in UU with 28 KOs, 1 KO per game, and a 2.1 KDA. Overquill with 21 assists, 0.7 assists per game, and a 2.1 KDA as a member of the 2020 club. And then Mudsdale in PU with 45 points, 1.7 points per game, and a 2.0 KDA. New Moon was extremely balanced all season, so it was a bit of a question as to whether or not they'd have any Pokemon in the All-Star game, but as far as the All-NWBA teams were concerned, their efforts were more than rewarded. 3 separate Pokemon ended up making it in, showing just how well balanced that team was. Mauville, in addition to their 2 first team members, had 2 second team members as well, so they led all teams with 4 total All-NWBA Pokemon. Zapdos and UU with 34 KOs, 12 assists, and a 25.3 usage rate, and Flygon and NU with 26 KOs, 40 points, and a 1.3 points per game. It wasn't all about the weather at times. Flygon, as a Terra captain, was very effective at putting up rocks, but also being a covert sweeper. And for Zapdos, whose presence on any game, any set, has been well documented throughout time, one of the longest standing good Pokemon ever, putting up one of its better seasons in NWBA history. Lucario of Ambrit Town represents them in RU with 32 KOs, 49 points, 22.1 usage rate. Satitan obviously was doing most of the damage for Ambrit, but when it wasn't Satitan, it was Lucario able to pick up the pieces and do a lot of damage of its own right. Hardhome's lone representative was Infernape, 34 KOs, 57 points, 2.1 points per game. Nobody treats the mascot better than Ball Heat. Infernape making its second straight All-NWBA team appearance, thanks to the hand of one of the most creative battlers in the league. Infernape, a linchpin for the second straight season for a Hardhome team that once again found themselves in the playoffs. And then finally, you have Pokémon of Sunny Shore MPU, 29 KOs, 1.4 points per game, 1.0 KOs per game. It's hard for PUmons to make a super notable impact. Typically, you only get 1 or 2 a season. And even though Sunny Shore didn't find themselves as a playoff team, Palmont, as a Terra captain, was able to do enough to keep them in contention for most of the season. It should come as no surprise that Titan of Ambertown ended up walking away with the Ruby League MVP in Season 7, but what may come as a surprise to you is that Titan is the first Pokemon in NWBA history to be awarded MVP unanimously. This was the biggest ballot in NWBA history with 22 responses, and yet all 22 voters said the exact same thing, that Titan should be the Ruby League MVP. 101 KOs and 181 points are both NWBA all-time records. Its 3.9 points per game and 2.2 KOs per game were both #1 in the NWBA this season. It goes without saying that this is the single most prolific season a Pokemon has ever had in the history of the NWBA. So hats off to Titan and Aleph for putting together one of the most, and really should be the single most impressive season by any one Pokemon in the history of this draft league. The Sapphire side of things was a tad bit more competitive, but still a very convincing victory for Basket Legion Female, your Sapphire League MVP in Season 7. 64 KOs and 111 points were both #1 in the Sapphire League and #2 in the entire league behind Titan. 2.3 points per game and 1.3 KOs per game. Basket Legion Female putting up low-key one of the 5 greatest seasons offensively in NWBA history. Were it not for Titan's record-breaking performance, we would be talking about how we haven't seen any Pokemon put up these numbers on offense since Season 1, where both Blastoise and Poltegeist put up crazy numbers for Freezington. So a very impressive season for Basket Legion Female. Again, one of the best we've ever seen, just dwarfed in comparison to what Titan did, but nonetheless still incredibly impressive and more than enough to get the MVP award in the Sapphire League this season. Moving on to the end of season superlatives in Season 7, we start with Best Coach. This was a very close award. A lot of different coaches were vying for this title, and the votes were extremely spread out, but ever so barely getting the nod is Jake, coach of CJ and the Kitakami Slashers, by virtue of CJ's improvement from season to season. In the past, CJ averaged 6 wins a season. This season doubled that total, ended up making the playoffs for the first time in his career. So as a result, Jake ever so slightly gets the nod for Best Coach of Season 7. For Best General Manager, that award goes to Aleph. Also pretty contentious, but Ambertown did in fact finish the regular season with the best record out of any team at 17-5, along with New Moon. And Aleph, by virtue of piloting Titan to that type of season, record breaker among record breakers, gives Aleph the nod for Best General Manager in Season 7. For Best Nickname, we actually had a tie this season. CTE Titans, the nickname for Titan for Ambertown, not as funny or as clever of a nickname that you typically see win Best Nickname, but it was very effective and it was right to the point. Titan causing CTE all over the league. A season like that, any of Titan's nicknames probably would have been in contention, because it's something that people would just have to remember watching this mon absolutely dominate CT Titans. More than effective enough. And sharing that tie is Great Fan Order, a nickname for Great Tusk of Mistralton. Once again, his coach Vasser putting his hat in the ring for Best Nickname. Very often a winner in NWBA history, and Great Fan Order once again considered clever enough by the voters to at least share the title of best nickname in Season 7. Moment of the season is a two-parter with match of the season, both highlighting the CJ and Earthflax beef and match mid-season. This came out of nowhere, and for the first time in league history, we had some real genuine jawing back and forth between two GMs. The crux of it being that Earthflax, as good of a player as he appeared to be, and as good as his team was, hovered around 500 for most of the season, and CJ absolutely flabbergasted at the idea of that, having mons like Kiram and Glutscore on the roster as well, and it eventually became a little bit heated between the two. CJ bringing the smack talk to Earthflax. Eventually CJ's coach got involved, raising the stakes, and it escalated to the point that Kiram was offered up by Earthflax as a reward, so to speak, for Earth's and CJ's eventual match. So not only did we get genuine beef, we saw a regular season matchup with stakes as high as any playoff matchup, one of the best mons in the format, being wagered as a result. As far as the match of the season itself went, it was a very interesting back and forth affair, right down to the wire. Early on, there were a lot of misses, a lot of havoc. You see that Earthflax going for the trick room, something that he hadn't really gone for before. At that point in the season, he had underwent a lot of roster reconstruction, but early on, the bulkier, slower team approach was working. He was able to get an early lead on CJ in game one, but of course, as we covered in our regular season review of this set, that contrary Enamorous was able to pick up the sweep in game one, so CJ getting that early advantage. But of course, in that second game, Earthflax was able to turn things around, and you saw the kind of havoc that was going on in this set. Mons dying behind screens, the sub lefties Arcanine H being the swap in game two, proving to be a crucial part of Earthflax turning the tables, picking up the KO on that contrary Enamorous, and eventually being able to force CJ to have to get even more aggressive in his bag of tricks. You see the dual dance, agility, weakness policy Metagross coming in, but at the end of the day, it was Earthflax who was able to pick up the game 2 victory. And then in game 3, it came down to a crucial play rough miss from Enamorous that allowed Reuniclus to set up the trick room and get sacked to the play rough to let Glastrier come in and pick up the pieces. And after an Icicle crash, a few high horsepowers, it was all over. So for Earthflax, he was in fact able to pick up the victory. Kiram stays on that roster, and with no Kiram or Gliscor, was able to pick up the victory over CJ. All right, with those accolades out of the way, it is finally time to end this journey. The NWBA Finals, Koroway representing the Ruby League, Humalau representing the Sapphire League. Coming into this matchup, you have the 5 in the Ruby, the 3 in the Sapphire, the lowest combined seeding in NWBA history. 2 GMs who have been there in King and Kobe. Will King become the second GM ever to win multiple titles, or would Kobe finally complete the journey and win his first? Here we go, Koroway and Humalau for the Season 7 championships. Out the gate and exchanging of pleasantries. Klefki getting up 2 layers of spice. Chansey getting off the Thunder Wave and the rocks. Klefki, of course, also screens, but you have to be aware that Dawn Fan is locked and loaded with Rapid Spin. So King opts to put Steel Beam on his Klefki to get some major chip on Dawn Fan, but is only able to get off 1 layer of spice before it goes down to Seismic Toss as the first KO of the set. Landorus locked and loaded with Swords Dance, but Sinister's got the Culprit Berry in the back pocket, able to get off a big Stun Spore on the Landorus as well. And Sinister being the main focus of Humalau's defense was a very crucial part of this matchup. You see King opting to go for some weirder tech Encore and then Acid Spray on Toxtricity, knowing that Chansey and Sinister would be big issues for this team to break through. And you see this Chansey able to get off a lot of damage, not take that much from the Acid Spray, Sinister comes in to block the Terra Normal Boom Burst, and because Toxtricity is no longer a poison type, that Machagacha is doing a lot more damage back. So Sinister able to pick up the KO with the second Machagacha on Toxtricity, a big part of Corway's offense down early in game 1. In comes Walking Wake, wisely flip turns out on the Chansey, so Azumarill set up to do some damage, goes for the knockoff, does a lot of damage to Sinister, but knows that it's probably going to be slower, so Vileplume is the swap. And you see that Strength Sap still getting off a lot of recovery for Sinister. Incin takes the Sludge Wave pretty well. Wake has to come back in. Doesn't really care about getting Will-O-Wisp. Primarina, however, doesn't really care about anything Walking Wake does. But fortunately, King flip turns out in Azu, but the Primarina is faster than the Azumarill, so at the very least, Donphan is the one that has to go down and not the Primarina. Indeedee comes in, reveals that it is in fact screens as well, and then shows Terrain Extender before going down to an Azumarill play rough. So Sinister is able to come in because it's behind Reflect. Azu's not going to be able to pick up the KO. Vileplume comes in to block the Machagacha. Chansey comes right back in, takes the Sludge Wave very well, and even though King is able to get off Elite Seed, Chansey more importantly gets off the softball to get back up to green HP. Landorus comes in on the next turn, able to block the Thunder Wave, seeing that it's already paralyzed. But because this thing is paralyzed, it's not going to be able to put up the greatest of fights, unable to get chip damage or set up the first SD on Incineroar, who knocks off the Gotchi Berry and then goes back out into Sinister, who's able to Strength Sap that all the way to get right back up to full. So even though the Cobra Berry is gone, Sinister's still in a very good spot. Strength Saps on the Walking Wake switch in to get back up to 100 HP. Primarina is able to come in on the Draco Meteor, blocks it completely. And from there on out, it's Primarina's chance to shine, gets off a big Psychic Noise on the Vileplume switch in, takes care of Vileplume with the second Psychic Noise, and then from here, because it outspeeds the rest of the team effectively, is able to Moonblast sweep. And so Humalao, after a tense back and forth game 1, is able to pick up the early 1-0 lead in the Season 7 Finals. Move to game 2, where Ambipom is the swap for Klefki and reveals Taunt as one of his moves. Typically, you would see Ambipom immediately go for Fake Out, but King, worried about an insane Will-O-Wisp, goes for the Taunt early. So you see a lot of back and forth once again between these two factions. Chansey able to get up rocks on turn 5. Sinister comes in, takes the crunch, but unfortunately gets a big defense drop, so has to go straight for the Strength Sap, which means that Toxtricity is able to position himself in, and then on turn 11, Machagacha crucially misses, and then Acid Spray gets the crit, so Sinister in a bad way here. Chansey gonna have to come in, take that Acid Spray, and then Indeedee is gonna have to come in knowing that both of Kobe's main defenses are down early, but of course Indeedee Female has been a Terra captain, very rarely used in the regular season, but the Terra Steel proving to be crucial. And then Kobe also predicting that King would go for Encore, getting off some good chip. Now, Azu is able to come in, knock Primarina, live the Moonblast, take care of Primarina with the Play Rough to give King the first lead of the set for him. Vileplume comes back in on Sinister, who is low, but because Sinister's faster, the Strength Sap is able to come through and get Sinister back up to a decent percent, living the Sludge Wave. Indeedee comes in to block the second one. King goes into Landorus, and Kobe gets off a light screen, goes back into Incineroar, who takes more than half from that EQ, so Donphan's gonna have to come in, takes 26, and then shows it has Ice Spinner to catch both Landorus and Vileplume. So Vileplume comes in, Strength Saps from the Indeedee, doesn't get too much back, but gets back up to 91%. Ambipom comes in and then T-Waves the Indeedee before going down to a Psychic, so more of a support set instead of the attacker that we've seen thus far. Landorus goes for another SD as Indeedee healing wishes into Sinister to get it back up to full, and because it's behind the Reflect, King decides to swap out into Toxtricity, who not only goes all the way down to 2%, but also gets burned so he can't even passively heal. Sinister misses another Machagacha, but that's all well and good. It doesn't miss the third one, so Toxtricity goes down. So Vileplume is going to have to come in to go for another Sludge Wave, but of course Chansey is able to block that. only takes 18%. And then the Leech Seed crucially misses as Chansey gets off the Thunder Wave on the Vileplume. So now Walking Wake has to come in on a soft boiled. King goes straight for the flip turn to bring Landorus back in, who's the only thing that can meaningfully damage this Chansey. And even though he is able to live the second Seismic Toss barely, and therefore pick up the KO on Incineroar on the swap, he's not able to do enough to KO the Sinister, who's able to Strength Sap it all back. And so King at this point basically has to fish for critical hits on this Sinister, but instead swaps back out in the Vileplume and figures that it's not even worth it keeping Landorus around. And then Sinister reveals that it has Hex on the moveset, so it's doing a ton of damage to Vileplume, picks up the KO after the second Hex. In comes Wake, who, as we earlier established, can't really do anything as long as Chansey's on the field. Landorus gets sacked to the rocks. Azu comes in, and while Playrough does do a decent chunk, it's not enough by any metric. Goes down to a Seismic Toss. Walking Wake comes in. Kobe wisely sacking Donphan just to ensure that Chansey can live and heal up with a soft boil, and a few turns later picks up the KO with the Seismic Toss, so Humalao goes up 2-0 on the set. Game 3, Primarina the lead. As up the lead on King's side, the swap for Ambipom. Armarouge notably the swap for Donphan, and you see that this Azelf is a standard classic Sash lead, gets up rocks, endeavors the Incineroar back down to 1% before going down. Chansey has to come in, and then immediately gives way to Sinister on the Landorus, but King not wanting to clear Cobra Berry early because he doesn't want Landorus to get stun spored, means that Kobe's able to jockey back and forth, eventually get up rocks before sacking Incineroar to the Landorus on turn 8. So Ndidi comes in, knowing that Lando's at -1. Terra steals as the Lando goes for an SD, immediately gets up the flight, only takes 30% from the crunch, and is able to get a lot of chip on Landorus. Sinister comes in and blocks the fourth move, Brick Break. So Kobe once again reading King's options quite well, able to get Chansey in a position to heal up on Vileplume, which it does on turn 14, even though it gets weak seeded. Landorus swaps in, but Kobe reads that and goes into Sinister. So King once again forced on the back foot. Kobe going for Machagatos is trying to get a burn on Vileplume to get that double Hex damage. Ndidi comes in, blocks yet another Sludge Wave, and so King has to swap out into a Azumarill, takes a decent chunk from that Psychic, and then Kobe brings in Primarina, gets knocked off, and then just goes for the Psychic Noise chip before going down to an Azumarill play-rough. But that means that Armarouge is able to come in and get the party started. Expanding Force comes out, picks up 2 quick KOs on Azumarill and on Landorus before Walking Wake has to come in and shut that down. Chansey easily taking the Draco Meteor once again. King forcing himself to Draco, knowing that if he lets Armarouge go, it's going to be game over. Kobe able to bring Ndidi back in on Vileplume, gets lead seated, and then as Walking Wake comes in, Kobe just settling for more chip, gets off a lot of damage with that Psychic. Chansey comes in, Walking Wake flip turns out, Toxtricity back in, and you have to play a very dangerous game. All 3 members of Kobe's main form of stopping Toxtricity on the field still, between Chansey, Sinister, and Terra Steel in DDF. And you can see Overdrive is doing quite a decent chunk to Sinister, but not nearly enough, knowing that Sinister is faster and can just Strength Sap it all away. So King going for another Acid Spray on Sinister, takes a decent chunk from that Machagacha before Overdrive is able to put Sinister down to 13%. Kobe just trying to stall for as long as possible, gets off another Strength Sap, but Overdrive is able to pick up the KO. So Ndidi comes back in, sets the terrain back up, and gets off a light screen before it goes down to an Overdrive, but that just means Armarouge is able to come right back in, pick up the KO on Toxtricity with the Expanding Force. Wake has to come in, force Armarouge back out. Scald comes out, not doing nearly enough to Chansey, doesn't even get a burn, and Kobe wisely going for the Thunder Wave, so it takes Vileplume to a point where it's slower than Chansey and it can heal up. Vileplume then getting fully down on 2 consecutive turns, so now it takes a huge chunk from Expanding Force, takes care of Armarouge, but at that point, It is a death knell to Corway's championship hopes by taking out Walking Wake. And so, the most competitive season in NWBA history ends in the first 3-0 sweep of the NWBA Finals. Jancy puts up 6 KOs and 5 assists. Primarina putting up 4 KOs as well, as the Humalal Swim team becomes your NWBA Season 7 champions. Jancy's huge playoff run concludes with a very deserving Finals MVP. And so at the end of one of the most competitive, wildest seasons in NWBA history, we offer our congratulations to Kobe and the Humalal Swim team, as well as their coach Muffin, the Season 7 NWBA champions. It has been a long road to the top of the mountain for Kobe. 6 seasons, but the 6th time is in fact the charm. Finally makes it in. Made a bunch of changes to this roster, so there's some 20-something Pokemon that might end up receiving a championship ring, but at the end of the day, he stands alone at the top of the mountain. So once again, congratulations to him, and a long-awaited welcome to the NWBA Hall of Fame. And with that, we can finally close the book on Season 7. It has been a long journey, but we have finally reached the conclusion. Thank you all for watching, whether it be this episode or whether or not you've been with us all the way since Season 1. We love and appreciate every single one of you. Season 8 is slated to begin upon the release of Pokemon Legends ZA, and at the time of this episode, we don't know when that game is going to release, so there might be quite a bit of time between now and the next time you see us. But until then, I've been your host, King Vasser, saying so long for now, and we will see you when Season 8 gets started up again. Take care.